Thanks very much, Fiona, and thank you to Fernwood for making this space open to us to kind of pick up on some of these crucial issues. I'm Ajay Parasram, beaming to you from Timbuktu Mi'kma'ki in unceded Mi'kmaq territory. We know that Fernwood is based here as well as in Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, and we have folks kind of from both ends of there and beyond with us today. I'm going to jump right into it. Our general approach here, we're going to pick up on a few questions, and we've agreed as the panel that we would hear initially from Yara, Sean, and Judy would answer our questions directly, and then we're going to hear some reflection on those thoughts coming from Peter and Nadia. So I'm going to jump right into it, and if we have time towards the end, we will draw questions as well from our lovely audience. So maybe as I call upon you, if you could introduce yourself in a way that seems appropriate, and your territories, that would be lovely. So I'm kicking us off here. The first question, and I'll address this first to Yara, please. Organizing in the cultural sphere has had some major wins lately. For example, due to the long, hard organizing efforts, the Giller Prize has actually split in their relationship with Scotiabank, which is a really big win. Can you talk about the impact of advocating for Palestine solidarity in the cultural sector and the educational sector? Go ahead, please.
Hello. I'm Yara, and I'm currently in Chibuktuk, and I'm a Palestinian journalist and founder of Free Palestine Halifax. So basically, how I see it, the cultural and educational spheres are not neutral, and that is something that we know because they shape, especially because they shape public discourse and also help legitimize the narratives. That's why Palestinian solidarity in these spaces is very important because it challenges complicity and it amplifies voices that have been silenced. So creating a safe space for Palestinians is important for these wins, for these wins to continue to happen because we need to acknowledge that Palestinians exist, and a lot of these things that I noticed, for example, for working at a Western newsroom, is that there is no acknowledgement whatsoever to being Palestinian, you know? And I realized with time and experience that is not just about people being biased or people being Zionist. Sometimes I realize that there's a lot of ignorance that people don't address, a lot of ignorance, which is complicity, that is not being addressed, a lot of microaggression, small comments that feed into the narrative and the erasure of us as Palestinians. So we need to continue, I guess, in sustaining the momentum because these are not just symbolic victories, they're just steps forward into systematic change. So we need to continue sustaining that because I know a lot of people got to a point where they are drained from going to protests, to vigils, to rallies, to everything. But everything needs to be said over and over again until change does happen. Everything needs to be said over and over.
Thank you very much for that, Yara. Sean, can I turn to you, please, with the same question?
Yeah, thanks. So the impact of advocating for Palestinian solidarity on the university, so I'll speak to that maybe. So I'm Sean Tucker. I'm coming from Coast Salish territory near Victoria, and I have a part-time appointment at the University of Regina. And until recently, I taught in the School of Population and Public Health, a leadership class at UBC. And to Yara's point, I mean, these are not neutral spaces, even though universities say they're neutral. They're certainly not. So for me personally, advocating for just education about Palestine and Israel came at a cost, in that I wasn't reappointed to my position. But I think it backfired on the university because it only brought more attention to the issue, to the Palestine exception in the public health school. So on the faculty side, I'm not going to speak to all universities, but just sort of generally kind of what I see. Now, on the faculty side, there's obviously education in the classroom is really important. Advocacy by Faculty for Palestine, independent Jewish Voices chapters, Jewish Faculty Network, and obviously students groups that I'll get to in a moment. Most faculty are unionized, so there's resolutions that are passed at AGMs, and that's one kind of point of advocacy. And what we also are hosting speakers and amplifying Palestinian voices at events, which we can do on campuses, and we haven't experienced yet the same level of repression that's occurring in the U.S. But I just want to say a few words about student activism, which is continuing on campuses despite the chill. And highlighting recently, UBC, of all places, UBC, the students, their groups organized a referendum for a 2-day strike in support of Palestine. And it's remarkable. Over 11,000 students voted, and 76% of UBC students, a relatively conservative campus, kind of corporate culture, 76%, when given the opportunity to voice, said they supported the strike. I think that's very significant, sends a strong message to UBC administration, but also across to other administrators. Several hundred students and faculty participated in the strike. That was followed up by a 14-day hunger strike, which just ended on Monday. And that hunger strike was for divestment, for UBC to divest from investing in companies operating on occupied territory and in weapons manufacturers. And so this is the university administration at UBC, I think, is really slow to change. But as we saw with the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, I mean, this is the process. It's inevitable now. And universities, I think, are one place where this is occurring right now. And I think it's just a matter of time. But we're going to see more of this at other campuses. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Sean. And that's wonderful to hear about these actions out at UBC. As a former UBC undergrad student, I'm a little bit shocked pleasantly to hear that. That's wonderful. Judy, would you like to take a stab at the same question, please?
Well, I might be taking a stab at a different angle, actually, than this. I live in Halifax, in Kajuktuk, and that's the unceded ground of the Mi'kmaq here in Nova Scotia. I live here, and I'm a former professor in the management department at St. Mary's University, but lately I'm one of the founding members of Independent Jewish Voices, and we're very, very much in support, of course, of Palestinians, and that's a major plank of what we always think about doing. I'd just like to talk about a couple of things. I'm not sure how many of you may have heard the latest news, which has something to do with the culture of this country, actually, around this question. It turns out that CIJA has lobbied, that's the Center for Israel Jewish Affairs, which is a Zionist group that's focused, a Jewish group that's focused totally on Israel and claims to represent Jewish people in Canada. CIJA has lobbied or sponsored trips for 58% of incumbent members of parliament. For the members of parliament who are running today, who are incumbents seeking re-election, 58% have been approached by, lobbied by, or given free trips to Israel by CIJA. This was revealed by David Mistracci in the Maple, I think it was yesterday, but it's something for us to think about. The lobbying power, frankly, of the pro-Israel or the Zionist movement is extremely strong. I just wanted to run something else by you. When I was listening to the two excellent speakers before, I just thought of something else. You know, here in Nova Scotia, we have a chocolatier, a chocolate factory family that makes chocolates. They're a Syrian refugee family. And they came here about 9 years ago. They settled in Antigonish, a small university city here in Nova Scotia. They make chocolates, and the brand is called Peace by Chocolate. It turns out that CEO Tarek Haddad of the family and CEO of this company had been invited by a legal group, a major 6,000 member legal group called the Advocacy Society, to give a keynote address about rights and why they left Syria 9 years ago and how they've made something of themselves here in Canada. It turns out that just last week, the Advocate Society, that represents judges, top lawyers, and advocates, decided they no longer wanted Mr. Haddad to come and to give them an address, saying it could possibly make their own members feel unwelcome to the conference that he was going to address. Now, that tells us a lot. I just wrote a blog today. My newsletter today is all about it. But that tells us an awful lot. It tells us that wealthy people, that established people in our society, perhaps Jewish, perhaps people who sympathized with Jews, on the board, the 40-member board, I must tell you, of this large organization, has decided it's too hurtful to have to listen to somebody who's going to talk about the genocide going on in Gaza. And that's what he was cited for. That's exactly why they didn't want him. So that just tells us the kind of struggle we have when Mr. Haddad can't even make a public speech in this country.
Thank you, Judy. That's, definitely a lot of context for us to think about. I'm going to turn to our respondents now to get some reflections on this, and of course to interject as you would. Peter, I'll turn to you first, please.
Thanks so much, and I'm very happy to be on the panel and learning from you all. My name is Peter Ives. I teach political science at the University of Winnipeg, Treaty 1 territory, the home of the Métis Nation, Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota country. I've recently written a book, Rethinking Free Speech. So that's sort of the angle that I'm sort of coming at this with. But I in terms of things that are happening, I think that Sean is totally right. I wanted to echo his sort of both the notion that things are happening among students and some faculty groups on campuses. Certainly at the University of Winnipeg, we've used the union to pass a ceasefire motion and as well as an academic freedom motion. That was a while ago now, and certainly watching the students around the country and all across Turtle Island and across the world mobilize around the genocide in Gaza has been, quite amazing, and especially how quickly it mobilized after the first events happened at Columbia University, that all of a sudden students everywhere were sort of doing the encampments, and there's clearly lots of communication amongst them. So I guess that's the sort of first thing, and I was actually thinking of Sean's article in the Tyee about the need and the sort of chill on campuses, and we were just talking in my identity politics course, and I was a bit shocked how many students said that they hadn't talked about the Israel-Palestine conflict in courses, and half of these students are political science students, and the other half are cultural studies students. So that was one of the things that shocked me. But I think what I wanted to add to our conversation here is, and I guess Judy's point, sort of fits in here as well, but that, with the election going on, it's a short election, it's an intense election. I have seen things where people are saying, think about where your candidate is on Palestine, but it is far down the agenda. It's not getting any news coverage. It seems like we've all been blasted in the face with Trump and the tariffs, and everybody's just talking about tariffs now in Canada. And it's actually quite disappointing. I mean, obviously, I'm worried about tariffs too, as is everybody, but that people aren't connecting, especially the increased crackdown in the U.S. with the students basically being disappeared. I mean, the video of the Tufts students basically being swept off the streets was just, frightening. And obviously, I guess what I'm sort of interested in is the way that for the last decade, the right wing in Canada and the US have been pushing this free speech down our throats to the point where, LGBTQ plus students have to listen to, transphobia and homophobia by speakers on campuses, and racialized students have to, listen to, overt white supremacy, and that all has to be okay in the name of free speech. And already there, and I think Judy was involved with the Cheryl Nestle's reports with Rowan Gadet, The Unveiling the Chilly Climate, which is really important because it documents how much Palestinian voices have been silenced well before October 7th, going back, decades. So to some extent, within the earlier climate of free speech absolutism, which has been very successful to the point where, in Ontario and Alberta, the premiers forced the Chicago Principles, which is sort of this free speech absolutist document from Chicago down, Canadian universities' throats. But that was a very different climate than now. And even though Musk and Trump will say they're free speech advocates, everybody knows that they're not. But I guess what I'm interested in is that where before it was definitely Palestinian exceptionalism, right? It was definitely the Palestinian voices and solidarity with Palestine that was being silenced, and it was out of kilter. Whereas it seems now that LGBTQ plus people are worried about crossing the border into the U.S. People's phones are being searched, and I think there's an awareness that it's the pro-Palestinian voices that are being silenced, certainly by Trump first, and in Canada, right at the moment where there's a backlash against the U.S. and a realization of how bad Trump is. I mean, the focus is because he's bad about tariffs, but hopefully that will lead to broader awareness that there's a whole bunch of authoritarian things going on. So I guess I just sort of wanted to raise that sort of sense in that I think we should all, or I will be trying to mobilize more around the way in which the solidarities amongst us all in terms of the crackdown on free speech. And then maybe, and it's a tricky one, right? Because I'm not a Canadian nationalist. I'm worried about tariffs, but not that worried about tariffs. I'm much more worried about authoritarianism and those questions. But I think it's making those links, which is crucially important for us now, so that it's not, because I think quite often it's easy to think, we have this pressing issue that we all know is incredibly important, but it's being drowned out by these other issues. But I actually think we need to make the connections, because the authoritarian issue is always there. And there's a through line between Trump has always been racist and anti-Palestinian, as have many of his supporters, right? But I think that the terrain certainly in Canada has changed a lot. So I will just end there. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Peter. And it's hard to separate that that rising fascism from the fact that the U.S. president is openly talking about removing Palestinians from Gaza to create, like a freaking whatever it is, like a real estate situation. Obviously, it's never going to happen, but we've been saying that for so long, and that's the slow creep of this kind of hyper-authoritarianism that's affecting our campuses, affecting our activisms and whatnot. So really great food for thought there. Nadia, I want to open up the opportunity for you to respond to what you've been hearing as well before we move on to the next question.
Well, the question that you're asking is an optimistic question. And so I hear in all of our voices a strong vein of optimism of, what have we achieved? What is going to happen that can be of use? What is going to make things better? And of course, we are all inspired by people who simply exist, who are not working necessarily to advocate, but just to be. And I give the example of Nemesis, the singer Nemesis. So she grows up on a farm in Milton, Ontario. She's of Palestinian origin, and she, wins big. There's an album where she's going to make it, and the businesses all say, yes, we'll take you on. You're going to make us lots of money. And then they drop her. So she's like, okay, that's fine. She searches out again. She gets another contract. She flies to California with her team, and then they drop her. She flies back to Milton, Ontario with her chickens and says, what am I going to do? I'm done as a singer. She has yet to release her first album. And through hook or by crook, she pulls through, and her talent shines, and she goes to Jericho and she films family. She films family. She makes the most homegrown video for a soundtrack for a song you could imagine. You know, they're riding bicycles, they're hanging laundry, they're singing, and she comes back and she puts this in and makes an album, and she sweeps the Junos. She sings at the Junos, she sparkles. And she's also a bit of a comedian. So if you want to look up Nemesis unreleased interview, you will think that it's a genuine interview, especially if all of you listening to this have ever been interviewed. You will think this is absolutely genuine, but instead it's a spoof. But it is so well done that no one really quite knows, including myself, I'm ashamed to say, that it is a spoof. And there are questions that essentially ask her, you know, why are you advocating so hard in the political realm? And she said, well, actually, all I did was be a Palestinian. And I think that that is a beautiful cultural win, where all she ever asked was to be. And with her talent and her voice and her art, she has won the hearts and souls of people all across Turtle Island. And if I move to this notion of voice, I love, Judy, how you brought up Tariq Hudhud. Now, his surname is actually the name of a bird. And this bird was the messenger of the prophet Suleiman or Solomon. So the irony of him being silenced and of him being quieted is that he is Solomon's messenger, you know, to give a message, a beautiful message to all of humanity. I mean, he makes chocolate. Like, let's just remember, this is another person just trying to be, you know. His political statement is, here is a bar of chocolate, enjoy, you know. So it is really dire when the voices who simply want to sing for you and who want to offer you something sweet are the ones being silenced. And if we go back to the question being asked, what are the achievements? Where have we moved? What can we see? I'll give the example of 70 tents on the lawn of the University of Ottawa, 130 people and more month after month sleeping there. Over 150 faculty, librarians, and staff from 3 post-secondary institutions in the capital region signing in support of this encampment. And then that encampment isn't just one. There are encampments and there are protests at the University of Ottawa, the University of Toronto, McGill University, University of Victoria, Thompson River University, McMaster University, University of Manitoba, Concordia University, University of Alberta, we won't go there, Saskatchewan, that's where they were beaten and hospitalized, the University of Alberta, Saskatchewan, University of Saskatchewan, University of British Columbia, Vancouver Island University, and the University of Quebec in Montreal. And one of the most extraordinary moves in there was done by Windsor University. So these demands to disclose and to divest university funds from killing apparati, I suppose, are being accepted and being understood and being shared. Entire faculty associations, not fringe groups, the entire faculty associations that have voted for divestment include the University of Montreal, Windsor, Wilfrid Laurier, Renison, Emily Carr, Saskatchewan, and Toronto Metropolitan. That's the faculties. Over 25 student unions and associations across Turtle Island have voted for divestment. We're talking about over 1.4 million members. That's how many Palestinians were in Palestine and denationalized in 1948. 1.4 million students have said we will divest across Turtle Island. And who supports these actions? Are these actions part of a settler colonial project, or Are they part of an indigenous resurgence? And so we see in May of 2024, we see Blackfoot elder Charlotte Yellowhorn McLeod, whose Blackfoot name is Satya Namyake, doing prayers at the encampment at the University of Calgary, having tobacco, burning sweetgrass, going according to protocol. And she describes, and it's available on YouTube for those who wish to see it, how the encampment approached someone from the Blackfoot Confederacy and asked permission from the Blackfoot, asked permission from the Siksika Nation, the Kainai Nation, from the Piikani Nation, and the Blackfoot gave permission. The Blackfoot said, yes, you do this encampment with our permission. And Elder Yellowhorn described how the encampment was done in peace. She described how they are dancing. There are lots of children here, lots of youth here, she says. And these, she says, are the future generations that we need to protect. Meanwhile, Ellen Gabriel writes that as the title holders to the land, the Ganyangahaga peoples must constantly remind entities like McGill University that they have built their institutions upon our unceded homelands, and that as rights holders, we have the authority over our lands. And finally, I return to the University of Ottawa when they offer an honorary doctorate to Algonquin traditional knowledge holder and spiritual advisor Albert Dumont. And Albert Dumont, in his speech, says to 700 graduates who were present, he says, we must renounce oppression wherever it is taking place. And someone shouts out from the audience, free Palestine. And he writes later on, he says, the only thing, and these are my last words before I pass it back to you, Ajay, the only thing with the ability of freeing Palestine is the love and energy of Creator. We need to be reminded sometimes that all of us have a bit of Creator's energy in our hearts.
Thank you so much for those words. That was a fantastic way of kind of wrapping up the that piece of like optimism and a beautiful way of thinking about how the work goes on and how the labor of being, you know, is probably in many ways the most inspirational dynamic across all of this. I wanted to also just add to your wonderful list there. I wanted to big up the students in Mi'kma'ki here too, who also all teamed up together, 5 universities on one campus and really held down the fort for a couple of strong months. And you know, the work that they did and the way that indigeneity and African Novus, the intersectionality that was fundamentally a part of the work was truly inspirational. And it was very much unclear whether or not students were teaching faculty or faculty were teaching students, which is maybe the most wonderful aspect of this educational bit that we're in. So we'll move to the next question. Thank you. And we'll go back in the same order of which we started. So Yara, please, I'll start with you. And this question is, Palestinian solidarity organizing is contending with various forms of repression, from fear and moral panic to threats to livelihoods, representation, outright repression, and censorship. These all work together to create a demonizing atmosphere. Can you comment on what you see is happening across institutions and in the media, and maybe shed some light on how we might counter this directly? Thanks.
Well, it's like you said, what I see happening is repression and silencing of Palestinian voices, and not even just Palestinian voices, just the Palestinian identity as itself. Again, like mentioned earlier, working in a Western newsroom before October 7th happened, my identity itself was a problem. My identity itself in the newsroom was too political for everything. For example, I'll get one of the small interactions that some people fail to understand, that they do make the existence of being Palestinian in institutions difficult. is, so one time I was working and an editor came up to me and asked where I was from. And then I said I was from Haifa, Palestine. She said, I believe Haifa is an Israeli city. Are you sure? So she's asking me where, so she's basically, she's asking me if I'm sure where I'm from. I was in that moment, see, I was confused. I was unsure if she was trying to just get a reaction out of me, or if it was genuinely, if she was genuinely curious and genuinely didn't know. And it's these interactions that contribute to the larger erasure of the Palestinian identity, and it's the continued repression. And repression thrives in silence. And the more people understand how these tactics works, and the more people understand how these small interactions do contribute to the erasure of the Palestinian identity, we can slowly move forward and create that space for people like me, like us. And another thing also that I do want to be transparent and honest about, advocating for Palestine do come with consequences, and that is something that needs to be acknowledged and known going into it. And that is just something realistic that we have to accept. We have to be able to create these spaces to continue to exist. And by seeing this and by stopping the repression of Palestinian voices and just creating those spaces and hearing the Palestinian identity, not just the political side, just the Palestinian identity itself, and understanding the Palestinian identity, we can counter.
Thank you very much for that, Yara. I'm going to move to Sean with the same question, please.
Yara, it's just so inspiring, your words. Thank you. I just want to ask, like, how much time do we have to talk about repression on campuses? Like, I'll move quickly. I mean, security surveillance is a big one, unprecedented on campuses. I've just never seen so many like small groups of students being filmed from multiple angles. I've never seen that in my lifetime. I'm 51 years old. I've never seen that. RCMP on campus at UBC quite frequently. The signal to students is don't talk about this, don't involve yourself with this. All of the signals are directed towards that. And I know some like here, like, oh, Canadian universities are like better than US. It's on a continuum, and there's still repression on campuses here. I think of actions towards students, discipline, in my case, not being reappointed. So, and I'm not alone. I mean, lots of people felt that. And, it always seems to be the maximalist approach. There's no proportionality to responding to people. Just like, it's unbelievable. I mentioned earlier, Nadia, of the Vancouver Island University. I know there's a couple of students there that are really struggling just with a overwhelming response from the university, withholding their degrees from their involvement in an encampment there. So, the chill is real on campuses. And to Yara's point, we're aware of the costs, and but we do this because it's important. It's important to especially educational institution where we have academic freedom of expression, not to give that ground. You give that ground, and it's hard to get it back. So, one of my friends and somebody I really look up to, does a lot of work on academic freedom, says, the best way to defend academic freedom is to use it. And so, I think we just have to keep doing that. It's really important. We're entering a new period now with what's happening in the US. How are international students at Canadian universities feeling, right? Their social media, faculty with the research collaborations at US institutions, travel to the US. I mean, there's lots of spillover effects, lots of spillover chill effects there. But maybe if I could just end briefly on kind of the optimistic note again, because I think it's really important. There's a lot of good things happening, and we're making some progress here. But broad-based solidarity is really important on campus. faculty supporting students when their discipline has been really important. And we don't hear about this a lot in the media, but Jewish Faculty Network, Independent Jewish Voices, Faculty for Palestine have been really advocating strong for students. Social media, I think, is really important to raise the Palestine exception when you see it, call it out. If you're a faculty member or anybody, you're doing a media interview and you're asked about this, call it what it is. Honest reporting can go pound sand. Like, I don't care. They're out there to intimidate CBC, and CBC National News has fallen for it, and continue to fall for it. But local CBC programming, I think there's been some really good work done there. And so when we have those opportunities to do media work, it's to speak truth. Truth telling is really important right now. So do it. And if somebody tries to dispute you with definition of genocide, go back at it, have it out on air. I think that's really important. And small thing here, if you know somebody in the news who's student, faculty member, anybody in your community who's being repressed, if you can send them an email on social media or something, just send them a solidarity message. It's so important that people know they feel seen, and we're sharing power and solidarity with people. So I'll just leave it there. Thanks again, Yara, for your incredible advocacy and voice.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you both, Sean and Yara. I just wanted to add to what you're saying. I was recently at a conference in Chicago, and I was spending time with Mamadou Tal, who's one of the students who has had to leave the United States during his studies. And he spoke very passionately, posing this question: can the tenured speak? Obviously playing off of Gayatri Spivak's bit, and it's like, we have those of us privileged enough to have the protection of tenure, and oftentimes it is our untenured and our colleagues who don't have stable jobs who are the ones right up front, doing the work, and the ones with the protection and the expectation to speak are oftentimes suspiciously quiet. So I think that that's a really important point to think about, and especially as we think about how we support students who are being victimized in really direct ways, like being put on lists to not be hired by law firms and whatnot. I mean, and we can barely even talk about this in public. So I agree with you very much that we need to be holding the space and seizing the interviews where we have them to actually force that conversation, even if the journalist isn't expecting it. I want to turn to Judy with the same question, please.
Thanks. I just want to say I agree with you, Ajay. We do have a problem. We have a problem on every campus. We have thousands, maybe 60,000 university professors in Canada, and I'm sure 45,000 of them have tenure. And I'd like to hear any number of them, or see op-eds by them, or see what they're doing. This was always a problem for me. I remember when I was at St. Mary's University here. I also want to just note a couple of things just on the positive side. I thought what Sean just said was a very good idea, that we have to get faculty, if we're looking at the universities, faculty support students who are willing to speak out, who are willing to go out of their way, who are willing to sit in. I also think that we have to use this wonderful technique we heard about tonight at UBC, which is the closure of the university. If every university in this country in the month of March or April, or while we're still in session, whenever that is, if they were to close for 2 whole days and say, we're closing, students are going on strike, we're not coming to classes, we're not going to be eating in the cafeteria, I don't know, all that stuff. We're not going to be doing that until there's some recognition of what's going on in Palestine, and could we talk to the administration to try and change things. 2 days of people not going to school, they're going to make any difference to them in their later life. But it's going to make a huge difference if we have this kind of action across the country. It may be a bit late, unfortunately, because now we're, I think, into the end of the term. So, I mean, I can't say we can do it now, but if UBC is doing it now, maybe some of us could. The other thing I just wanted to touch on is some of the cases people may not have heard about people whose rights have been squelched. And I'm not sure how many of the listeners or the people on the panel know about, for instance, last year, a nursing student at the University of Manitoba, Arij Kafaji, sorry. This nursing student at the University of Manitoba was deprived of her studies for 3 months, was accused of being an anti-Semite, was a person who was removed from her classes in the nursing school because she dared to criticize Israel. This is a 23-year-old young woman with her life ahead of her. Finally, after a big investigation, she was, of course, cleared, but she missed the 3 months and whatever that means to one's university studies and one's self-esteem. Another thing I just want to talk about briefly is I'd like to talk about Birju Jatani. And I've been writing about him for quite some time because Mr. Jatani was fair and square awarded the top job in human rights, arguably, in this country, being the executive or being the CEO of the Canadian Human Rights Commission in Ottawa. This was whipped away from him back last June and July, so he was not allowed to take up his post in August because he had dared to be on the platform when he was at university in Britain. He had dared to be on the platform with people who spoke against Israel and spoke against genocide and spoke against, well, American imperialism, everything you could think of. He was he was sitting there or on the platform, and it was all guilt by association, but it wouldn't have made a difference. But what we have with Mr. Jatani is a man who was awarded the job last May, was supposed to start in August, and on August the 1st or July 30th or something, he was told he could not have the job. And CIJA, again, the Center for Israeli Jewish Affairs, which is a leading pro-Zionist organization of Jews in this country, they take pride in admitting that they were the ones that had him canceled from his career. Now, this is another case. There's just a huge, huge case. And of course, the fact that he's Muslim, that Mr. Jatani is Muslim, the fact that he's brown, the fact that the nursing student, Arij Kafaji, is also brown, isn't lost on me at all. That a lot of the people who've suffered discrimination and hateful behavior and loss of jobs have been people of color in this country. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much for that, Judy. We'll turn to our respondents now. Peter, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot to respond to. Thank you very much for bringing up the Kachaji, the nurse at the University of Manitoba, because obviously it was local, and it was actually really interesting seeing the colleagues of mine, a Jewish colleague of mine, was incredibly helpful for her in that case, and sort of seeing, and even that the sort of the legal issues around her not wanting to make it a big media issue when other people were sort of thinking strategically it could be. So, all of those cases, and I think they're all really, really important. I guess I do sort of, I guess there's a couple things that are sort of tossing around in my mind as I was listening to everybody speak. One is, we haven't talked about the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, but clearly I think everybody knows about that. I will say that I think that the publicity around that, again, that's been a decades-long campaign. And until recently, I would talk to people a lot who I would have thought would have known and didn't know anything about it. And that seems to be changing, and that's because of a lot of work that lots of people have done. And so I think that we need to keep up on that score. And also, again, reiterating the working with students. And I guess the other thing about watching things in the US, it utterly stuns me that it's not only our other faculty with tenure who should be speaking up, but the administration of universities, but obviously there's critiques of the growth of the administration apparatus at universities in general. But I think one of the outcomes that we're seeing is that they have utterly no teeth to stand up to anything. And so when you see that Columbia University is threatened by Trump and the Trump administration to withdraw $400 million And then they caved to that threat. And at first, and then news media reported over and over again that $400 million, and it sounds like a lot of money, but that is actually nothing that's like 6% of the budget of Colombia. And Colombia has a 16 billion or something in their dollar endowment, right? So if you're thinking, and somebody like Jason Stanley, who is the Yale professor who's now moved to University of Toronto, so he's sort of pointed out that if the U.S. university system prides itself on being one of the best in the world, and people come from all over the world to get educated there. Well, if all of the foreign students there don't have any free speech rights or academic freedom rights and can be deported at any time for doing anything pro-Palestinian, but a whole bunch of other things, then they basically have a very parochial, non-world class university system, right? And the idea that a university like Columbia, and obviously a lot of the private ones, a lot of other universities in the US, I think, are running financially much more hand to mouth, but a lot of them are incredibly wealthy. So the idea that they couldn't stand up to that level of bullying is clearly an indication that they do not see the pursuit of knowledge and the open and critical discussion of ideas as central to what it is that they do as a university, right? And I think that we need to be very aware of that right now, because Canadian universities are, cash strapped. They're all worried about money. But also, we've seen this, what somebody called the brain gain of American academics wanting to come here. I'm not so interested in that. I'm much more interested in us using this context to really reinforce how critical academic freedom is to universities, how students, and I think in Canada, like one of the things I sort of talk about in my book is I go back to the Lindsay Shepherd case. And I really think that case should have created a discussion about whether students at Canadian universities should have academic freedom. Right now, they don't. They're in our collective agreements as faculty members. I think it'd be very interesting. I think it'd be good to have a national discussion on students having academic freedom. And I think the encampments might have had a lot of more strength and support there if there were even sort of more superficial statements that students had academic freedom. Anyway, so I will leave it there. But thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Peter. And when I read your book, I was surprised to learn that it is actually a labor issue, in Canada, on understanding academic freedom principally as a labor issue. I simply did not know, and so much of us, I think, assume that it operates the same way in Canada and the United States. And your book was a fantastic primer in understanding the crucial differences between the two. So yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to give the last word here to Nadia to bring us home on this question.
I see the question in two parts, and I hear the answers in those same two parts. On the one hand, there's a question about what is creating a demonizing atmosphere and how do we observe that? And I think one of the most remarkable examples is in the media. A CBC journalist named Brishti Basu decided that she would write an article talking about people who were, and I'm quoting from the article, censored or suspended from work and school. So she publishes this, CBC publishes this in December of 2023. And right after, her contract is prematurely terminated. And so the irony is that she's documenting all these other people who are losing their jobs because they're saying it's not good to kill children, for example. And then she loses her job for saying that people are losing their jobs. So, I mean, the next thing, someone's going to lose their job for saying that anyway, you understand the point. So then, I mean, this is the uplifting part, right? Then she publishes an article that CBC perhaps never would have published, of a length and a depth of investigative reporting that is almost unseen, where entitled Abuse of Power, Hospitals and Med Schools Crack Down on Palestine Advocacy, and she publishes it with The Breach. And so the second half of this question is, how do we counter this? How do we counter the demonization of just saying we think children should be alive? You know, how do you, it seems preposterous. Who could possibly argue that it's wrong to say children have a right to live? And yet that is what we face. Anyone who says children have a right to live is denounced. They lose their employment. I mean, some of you have described this in intimate detail, and so I don't need to explain it further. So it seems preposterous, but it is the case. And so how do we counter this? Well, I would say we step it up a notch, and that's what Brishti Basu does. And I have other examples, of course. So in the medical field, we hear of a number of doctors. So at the University of Ottawa, Dr. Yipeng Ji, who is the poster child for medicine at the University of Ottawa. He goes to Harvard, he gets a poster. He does this, he gets a poster. There's about 4 articles promoting the university by promoting him. He is literally the poster child. But when he says, I have firsthand seen genocide in action, and as a doctor, I would like to say we should not support genocide, the university drops him like a stone and kind of hopes he sinks to the bottom of a lake, but he does not. And in the end, because all he's done is be a doctor, again, this is just the right to be, he's just a doctor. At the end, all he does is act as a doctor should act. The university says, we'll reinstate you. But by this time, Dr. Ji is like, well, actually, I'm good. And again, like Brishti Basu, ramps it up, moves it up, and co-founds initiatives that are nationwide, that are international, that are on a scale where he can't walk down the street without people asking for his autograph. And I say this because I walk down the street next to him, go, what about mine? Don't you want mine? And then there is Dr. Ben Thompson, who when he also says, I don't believe in killing people. I'm a doctor. I believe in healing people. He's threatened to be killed, and then the threats extend to the hospital. So this isn't just any institution. There are bomb threats at the hospital where he works. Fire him or we bomb the hospital. This is in Canada. This is in Ontario. This is in Richmond Hill, which is usually known not for these kinds of things. This is it used to be a semi-rural area. Now it's a very residential area, but what I'm trying to say is that demonization is at that point. This is the moment for us all to wake up. Hospitals in Ontario are being threatened with bombs because the doctors are saying we want to be doctors and we advocate life. And again, they ramp it up, and he is reinstated. Dr. Thompson is later reinstated. And meanwhile, in Quebec, 500 healthcare professionals demand that their medical associations take a stand. Meanwhile, in Ottawa, again, at our, in our faculties in Ottawa and Toronto, we have a doctor in Ottawa saying, as you mentioned earlier, someone saying that, the blacklists being developed, these are people we shall not hire in the legal profession. So a blacklist was developed and advocated for, these are people we shall not hire in the medical profession. 271 professionals who believe in health and human rights were told, arguments were made that they should be blacklisted. Again, by doctors who are working here. So these are doctors in Ottawa who are advocating to blacklist doctors who stand for human rights. In the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto, instructor and family physician says to people who are in the encampment, I hope you never need healthcare from the University of Toronto. That's all I can say. And this is, of course, filmed, live, broadcast nationwide. And so there is an atmosphere of demonization. You believe in health and human rights, you won't get health care from us. You believe in healthcare and human rights, you won't be employed by us. You will be your position will be terminated in media, in healthcare, in academia, and so on and so forth. So the question comes back, how do we counter this? And I thought what was beautifully said, Sean, you were quoting someone. I'd love to ask you who you were quoting, because it's a beautiful saying. The best way to defend academic freedom is to use it. And so if we remove the word academic and we just talk about freedom, the best way to defend freedom is to use it. And all of us have a modicum of freedom. And if we don't use it, even that is going. And the beauty is that when some freedoms are taken away, and when the wings of these birds are clipped, the birds get up again and they fly higher, just to show that it's possible and that the freedoms are not to be taken away. It's quite inspiring to see these individuals and to be with all of you who do the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Thank you, everyone. This has been a really riveting evening, and in keeping with the spirit of our intent to keep this to a nice, tight, inspiring hour, I think we'll probably bring this to a very logical conclusion with those inspiring words. The one thing I did want to say before we say good evening for today is to thank our hosts at Fernwood Publishing. And the reason I want to thank you is that I have not seen a roundtable like this being organized by Penguin Random House, by any of the university presses. I haven't seen any of that, right? For all the same reasons, we could have had just as much conversation about like what happens within publishing around here. So I think all of us have a lot of love for Fernwood. It's publishers of choice, and I would just thank you for choosing to use your voice and take chances on the books that are risky, because it means a lot to advancing the conversation in this country and internationally. So we have lots to go on for tonight. I'll just pass it. I don't know, Fiona, if you had any kind of last closing remarks, and we'll say good evening.
I do not, other than thank you all so much. I have a million more questions, but I'm going to refrain from starting a new conversation. Thank you so much for being here. It was really so informative and interesting and inspiring. And I'm looking forward to more conversations as we continue to fly higher.